Welcome back to our series on Atlas cohort definitions, a closer look at concept sets, queries, and group logic. My name is Chris Knoll. I'm with Janssen Research and Development. And in this last video, we will be looking at groups. Groups provide the mechanism to apply Boolean logic to the counts of events found by queries. So if you recall this screen, we've seen this example before, but in this case, we have a single group looking for any of these two count criteria objects. They are looking for at least one of procedure occurrence or at least one of biopsy. And we have the option to either choose any or all, and then all. When we say having all, that means that we want both this procedure occurrence count and the observation count to be true. So counts specify the quantity, the count type, the visit and observation period constraints, and the time window relative to an index event. So at the top of a count UI element, you specify the count requirements and the type of records that count, either all or distinct concept ID. And in the lower portion of it, after the query, we specify the time window to seek records and visit occurrence and observation period restrictions. So focusing on counting operations, the choice of a record count condition determines if the rule is an exclusion or an inclusion. So if it says at least one, then we're talking about an inclusion rule. You have to have at least one of this prior diagnosis. When we say exactly 0, we're talking more in terms of exclusion rule, where we're saying must not have a prior exposure to some drug or some other observational event. Exactly 0 means that they do not have it. They must not have it. And then finally, there's an option to say at most n, where we can say that there can be no more than n events found in the specified time window for the given query. The choice of distinct or all determines how we count the records from the query. Distinct means unique concept IDs from the query. So that could be unique drug exposure concept IDs or unique condition concept IDs. The distinct is used to count only those unique occurrences of the concept, not the individual records. Whereas if we specify all, then we count all results of the query by records. So something to note here. The use case of distinct concept counts is a very specific use case. In the future, additional options for unique dates or unique visits will be provided so that you can do queries like diagnoses on different days. So it must have 3 occurrences of a diagnosis on different days or at different visits. And that will be allow you to do these type of more complex logical rules easier inside the Atlas tool. The second half of this count operation is the time window. The time window specifies the range to look for the records relative to an index event, if the records should have the same visit occurrence as the index event, and if the records can be sought outside of the index event's observation period. Here's some simple patterns that are commonly found in cohort definitions in Atlas. The first one is with a prior diagnosis. So we want to say the diagnosis starts between all days before and 1 day before the index start date. Visually, that means that if this is our index event, we want the diagnosis start date to be 1 day before and all days before, between all days before and 1 day before the event date. If we said that we actually want to include the index event date, then we would say the diagnosis starts between all days before and 0 days before the index start date. Because when we say 0 days before the index start date, that is the index start date. So that means that the range of days that we will find the diagnosis will be all days before to the same day as the event date. We can also do an operation like look for a drug overlap using a drug error record. Let's say that we have the drug era starts between all days before and 1 day before the index start date, and the drug era ends between 1 day after and all days after the index start date. Looking at that visually, that means that we have our index event, and the drug era starts prior to the event, and the drug era ends after the event. So what that means is that this drug era will span the event date itself. So Groups can also support groups of groups. Consider this inclusion rule where we're saying phototherapy in the prior 30 days and having any of a biopsy procedure in the prior 60 days or a skin cell specimen in the prior 60 days. For this, we need a second level group to group the or of biopsy and specimen. So here is that statement where we need a second level group of biopsy and specimen. And here we see the UI for the group where we have one group that has two expressions in it. The first expression is the count expression saying with at least one occurrence of a procedure of phototherapy within 30 days before. And then we say and now we start another group, a new group within this group saying and having any of the following criteria. Remember, and any means or, so we're going to look for either of these two. We can say with at least one specimen of skin cells or at least one procedure occurrence of skin biopsy. Groups can also specify at least n of the group. So in this example, we have 3 count criteria inside this group, and we say, okay, at least one occurrence of phototherapy or skin cell specimen or a procedure occurrence of skin biopsy. But at the top, we're saying we have to have at least 2. So any combination of these 2 count criteria in the group of 3 will satisfy this group. This lets you satisfy those type of requirements in cohort definitions where you'll say something like must have at least 3 of these 5 conditions. Can queries contain groups? Yes, they can. In this example, we're showing a group that has a single criteria in it, which is to look for phototherapy, a procedure occurrence of phototherapy. But this procedure occurrence of phototherapy embeds a group in it. So this phototherapy has to have either a procedure occurrence of skin biopsy within 60 days and a specimen of skin cells within 60 days. The important thing to note about this is that since the query now contains this group, the skin biopsy procedure and skin cell specimen is indexed off of phototherapy. That is because this group is now attached to this query. So this group will now be indexed off of that query. Compared to this outer group, which with the procedure occurrence of phototherapy, this procedure occurrence of phototherapy is indexed to the cohort entry criteria. So hopefully that is clear. There are also a special type of group criteria called demographics criteria. A demographic criteria applies rules to the index event itself, useful to apply a common rule to a group without specifying it for each query. So as you can see in this UI, this is a count criteria where we're counting and we provide the window of time to count from. In this example, we don't have a count or a time window. This is basically just applying a rule to the actual index event for this group, for this criteria group. In this case, we're saying that age at index has to be after 45, and the index event has to start on or after October 15th. This looks like something that maybe like an ICD-10 cutover might apply to. So in conclusion, groups provide or evaluation on the results of counts. A count expression involves a count requirement, a count type, meaning distinct or all, a time window to seek records, and a visit occurrence or observation period restriction. Time windows specify the days relative to the index event's start or end date for the queried event's start or end. Groups can have subgroups. Groups can specify at least n to indicate a minimum number of count expressions that must pass. Queries can have groups, which reassigns the index event to the query that you're creating. And then demographic criteria can be put into groups to apply a criteria to the index event.